when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle, and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello and welcome to We Need to Talk About on GB News with me, Alex Phillips, where we get stuck into the big issues of the day that need looking at in depth. Nothing is off the table and nobody is going to get cancelled for saying exactly what they think. Keeping me company today is the former editor of the Daily Star newspaper, Dawn Neeson. And here's what we've got coming up on the show. Western intelligence warns a replenished Russia could win the war in Ukraine. We speak to none other than ex-US National Security boss John Bolton. And it's starting to look like curtains for Boris. We speak to a top barrister who says the Prime Minister did not mislead Parliament. And how the woke Twitterati laughed when no sooner had Elon Musk bought shares, he was booted off the board. Well, they aren't laughing now, as the richest man on Earth and in space is preparing to buy the lot of it. That's what we're talking about for the next hour. But what do you need to get off your chest? Email us, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or you can tweet the channel @GBNews. First of all, though, it's time for the GB News headlines.
Good afternoon, it's 1 minute past 2. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. Boris Johnson says he's sure he'll still be Prime Minister later this year. That's despite fresh criticism from senior members of his own party. Speaking this morning, Mr Johnson added that the public want the government to get on and focus on other issues. That, as Conservative MP Tobias Ellwood said, there's an absence of discipline, focus and leadership in Downing Street. Last night, MPs ordered an investigation into whether the Prime Minister misled Parliament over COVID breaches. Boris Johnson says a new partnership agreed with India will enable the country to strengthen its own defence industry. The Prime Minister is currently in New Delhi for talks with his Indian counterpart Narendra Modi. As part of the new deal, Boris Johnson's pledged to support India's goal of building its own fighter jets to reduce expensive imports of military equipment. Mr Johnson said the two leaders had told negotiators working on a post-Brexit trade deal to get it done by Diwali in October.
Today, we've agreed a new and expanded defence and security partnership, a decades-long commitment that will not only forge tighter bonds between us, but support your goal, Narendra, of Make in India. We've agreed to work together to meet new threats across land, sea, air, space and cyber.
The United Nations is warning the number of civilians killed in Ukraine is going to be much higher as the horrors inflicted in areas of intense fighting come to light. The organisation added there's growing evidence of war crimes and said Russian troops have indiscriminately bombed populated areas, killing civilians and wrecking hospitals. This as Boris Johnson announced the British embassy in Ukraine's capital, Kyiv, will reopen next week. Earlier, the mayor of Mariupol appealed for a full evacuation of the besieged Ukrainian city after the Russian president claimed it's now controlled by his forces.
There are still 100,000 people in this city who, for the second day in a row, are waiting for evacuation. And they give us just such a tiny number of buses. Like it was yesterday, they said there would be 90 buses, but only 7 arrived.
The World Bank estimates the war in Ukraine has caused $60 billion worth of damage to buildings. David Malpass, the organisation's president, made the comments during a conference in the US. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky also spoke at the conference. He said his country needs $7 billion a month to make up for economic losses.
The funds from the war tax should be used to help Ukraine, to rebuild everything that Russia has destroyed in the war. And if this tax is applied to other aggressors, the funds should be directed to the victims of the war. Every country in the world needs to prepare now for the possible complete severance of relations with Russia. No one should depend on the political whims of the leaders of that country.
A German national linked to the disappearance of Madeleine McCann has been identified as a formal suspect by Portuguese authorities. In 2020, German police said they were investigating a man known as Christian Bruckner in connection with the case. The 3-year-old disappeared during a family holiday in Praia da Luz in 2007. In France, Emmanuel Macron and Marine Le Pen are out on their last day of campaigning ahead of the presidential vote on Sunday. Opinion polls show President Macron is about 10 points ahead of the far-right leader, but his re-election is by no means a done deal. Surveys are predicting a voter turnout of roughly 73%, which would be the lowest since 1969. And UK retail sales dropped last month as the rising cost of living starts to hit consumer spending. According to the Office for National Statistics, they fell by an unexpected 1.4% in March. Online sales bore the brunt as people cut down on unnecessary purchases, dropping 7.9%. Fuel sales also fell as people reduced their non-essential travel amid soaring petrol and diesel prices. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now, though, it's back to Alex, and we need to talk about.
Satellite images of mass graves in Mariupol likely reveal what is widely feared, that Russia will stop at nothing to destroy Ukraine, resorting to genocide to overcome a nation that turned out to be far less receptive to Russian invasion than Putin's commanders probably briefed or believed. Putin's rare direct intervention on military strategy staged for Russian TV suggests he's hardly about to retreat to save face anytime soon. A conclusion perhaps also drawn by Western intelligence agencies as the Russian army outnumbers Ukrainian forces in the east 2-1, meaning Putin's troops could conduct a pincer movement from the Donbass and the Black Sea and relaunch a devastating assault on Kiev. The desperation for weapons to try to contain the Russian offensive is critical. Yet the shopping list that landed on the German Chancellor's desk went from 48 pages to 24 and had only 3 of the 15 types of arms requested by Ukraine. The Chancellor Olaf Scholz's coalition partners have accused him of risking World War III by not sending heavy weapons and refusing an embargo on Russian oil and gas. His excuse? That if Germany were to hand over tanks to Ukraine, they wouldn't have enough to defend themselves. Germany's military was notoriously crippled under Angela Merkel and relies on old stocks for spare parts. Which dreadful defence minister was responsible for that? One Ursula von der Leyen. Well, I'm very pleased to say we can now speak to John Bolton, former United States ambassador to the United Nations and national security advisor to President Donald Trump. John, it's always wonderful to have you on the show. Let's have a look at where you think we are with the situation in Ukraine at the moment, with Western intelligence agencies briefing that perhaps Russia could yet win this war. The idea that has been stated by Russian general that there could be permanent occupation, certainly of the south. Do you think that we're nowhere near out of the woods yet?
Well, I think that's very clear. I mean, I think the performance of the Russian military at the beginning of the war, the first 7 weeks, was very unexpectedly incompetent. Certainly, I don't think Western intelligence believed it would go as badly for the Russians as it did. That isn't to take anything away from the heroism of the Ukrainian defenders, but the real story here is the bad Russian strategy, bad tactics, bad logistics. Now, we're in another phase, but I think we're in a race against time. Whether Russia can get its act together before the weapon supplies that President Zelensky has been pleading for can get to the front lines of the Ukrainian defense forces. And I think this development this morning that you just mentioned of Russian commanders saying expressly that it's not just the eastern part of Ukraine that the Russians are after, but the southern part, and meaning the whole southern part, the entire north coast of the Black Sea, including the port of Odessa, is very significant. So I do think, as world leaders have said, this is a critical phase, and I don't think we can predict the outcome at this point or how long it will last.
It's a critical phase indeed, but a big stumbling block from the beginning when it comes to NATO's resilience and helping Ukraine arm itself against Russia has been Germany. And Germany saying that if we give our tanks, our old stock even to Ukraine, well, we're in a mess. And also, if we cut off Russian fuel supplies, we're going to go into recession. On the balance of risks, is that something that Germany should be prepared to do? Or at this point, is it the case that Putin will probably stop at nothing and Germany has, a national obligation to look after its own interests?
Well, I think this is the kind of split inside NATO that Putin will look to exploit. And it's not the only split. It's not the only place where Germany has diverged from other allies. And I think it portends real difficulty for the alliance going forward. I think we've been patting ourselves on the back collectively a little bit too much here. And I think it's a real indication, not just in Germany's unwillingness to supply the heavy weapons that Ukraine really needs at this point, but Germany's continued unwillingness to cut off its purchases of oil and gas from Russia. Perhaps they will at some point, but every day that goes by that Russia is still being paid for the oil and especially the natural gas that it's piping to Europe are days that Putin's still making a profit off this war.
Now, our Prime Minister is in India today with the Prime Minister Narendra Modi, and part of the conversation is about the UK supplying defence weapons to India, who have notoriously for a long time bought things like fighter jets off Russia. Given that India has failed to really openly condemn Putin's actions and abstained from critical votes in the UN, are we right to be doing arms deals right now with India?
Difficult decision to make here, whether it wants to pull away from Russia, certainly, as you indicate, in terms of purchases of sophisticated weapon systems like the S-400 air defense system, which may cause U.S. sanctions against India, but also from its recent conduct of purchasing Russian oil. Publicly reported in February and March was that they have quadrupled their purchases of Russian oil, which is pretty substantial. So I think Prime Minister Johnson will be saying, look, you're worried about China, as you should be, as all of Europe should be, and the United States going forward. And if we're going to be in this together to deal with a threatening China, we've got to be aligned in terms of weapon systems and that sort of thing. And this continued Indian reliance on Russia and its continued support for Russia, and that's what the purchases of oil are in the middle of this war. It's very difficult to explain to our constituents at home.
And finally, there's been talk of potential future military action in Moldova as Russia aims to sort of seek full control of Transnistria region. And Moldova is critically a neutral country, but very much NATO adjacent. If Putin were to put boots on the ground in Moldova, would that represent a very serious escalation?
Well, absolutely. Of course, there are already Russians there in the Transnistria Republic, and there have been since the breakup of the Soviet Union. It's one of the frozen conflicts that has helped keep Moldova from applying for NATO membership. And I think if the Russians could get there across Odessa and link up, they could send troops through the Transnistria Republic on right into the heart of Ukraine. If you look at a map, it's a very serious problem for the Ukrainians, and one that if the Russians had exploited earlier in this war, could put Ukraine in a much more serious position. People should not think that despite the successes of Ukraine we've seen in these first 2 months, and they have been incredible, that it means that the war is coming to an end or that Putin's going to be overthrown. I don't think there's any evidence of any diminution in the Russian government's determination to accomplish their long-term goal to bring Ukraine and Belarus and other parts of the former Soviet Union back into Mother Russia. It's not going as well for them as they would like, but they have not given up their objective.
John Bolton, always a privilege having you on this programme. It's fascinating to hear your insights. Thank you very much. Well, joining me now on the show is filmmaker and former Royal Marine Commander Emil Gessen. Now, Emil, you are fighting in Ukraine. How is the situation worsening there? I mean, do you feel that there's any sort of reprieve, or as Prime Minister Johnson has said today, he sees this war lasting at least until the end of the year? Is that the sort of gloomy outlook that you share?
Yeah, I'm not currently fighting. I'm a filmmaker. I don't do fighting. But yeah, the war, there is, at the moment, the feel on the ground amongst the people here is no one knows where the light at the end of the tunnel is going to come, when the war is going to end. A lot of people are braced for a long-term war, potentially here in Ukraine. But then again, people need to be mindful that this didn't start in 2022. It started in 2014 when in Kiev, the uprising, and also the Donbass region where the separatists rose up to take over the territory there. So really, there is no end in the sight at the moment.
That we're becoming rather inoculated against some of the horrifying atrocities taking place in Ukraine. I mean, you know, a headline broke today about mass graves in Mariupol with harrowing satellite images of the sheer scale of trenches that could well have been dug to bury civilian bodies. Is there a risk that people back home in the UK are sort of losing interest in what that might mean for the Ukrainians?
Yeah, 100%. My previous documentary was in the Karabakh, I mean.
Emil, we're losing connection with you, unfortunately. We'll see if we can get Emil back because he's got some fascinating stories to share. Well, with me in the studio today is Dawn Neeson, who's former national newspaper editor and commentator. Dawn, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, the situation is escalating in Ukraine, frankly. If we once were celebrating the idea that perhaps there was this brave, plucky nation pushing back against Putin, the tide seems to be turning, and yet our own headlines are filled with our domestic news again. What do you think that signifies?
I think we have reached the point where a lot of people in this country, and I'm not one of them, by the way, are thinking, I just can't cope with any more of the horror. And we saw the images today of the mass graves, and I stood by a mass grave in Bosnia during that conflict. And Alex, if you've ever experienced it, you will never ever forget what it's like. I mean, it was in the silent woods up in the mountains, and not even the birds appeared to sing around there. That was probably my imagination, but it's an utterly chilling experience. However, I've been there and I've done that. But now, for most people in this country, with everything that we're concerned with, the cost of living, for example, in this country, seeing an image of a mass grave, it's almost like we are being anaesthetised to it. It's like, I can't cope no more. And you can't blame people for feeling like that. People have got a lot of worries themselves at the moment. But it's like, as our commentator just said, this started in 2014. We did nothing then. We let Putin get away with Crimea then. We did nothing. And so no wonder he has sensed that he can do what he's doing now. And going back to earlier in the conversation, the West has never been weaker, has it? You know, the NATO, Europe breaking up, possibly the world's worst president in America who, doesn't even seem to know where he is most of the time. So if you were Putin, you would be sensing that this is now the time to attack.
And Germany's duplicity plays into that a huge amount, doesn't it? Do you think we're being a little bit too reticent about not calling Berlin out on their hypocritical actions, still buying fuel from Russia, failing to send the weapons needed in Ukraine?
Absolutely. And the one thing that has been annoying me in particular today is Boris trying to do his best over in India. And everyone's going, oh, yes, but, they buy arms from Russia and they're supporting the war in the Ukraine. Well, so is Germany. By the simple extension that they are buying fuel. I know we are, but a tiny percentage as well, and we are getting rid of that. But Germany's shown no signs of stopping that. They're the ones that are, they break pretty much all the sanctions that we put on them, and they are putting the euro and their economy before Ukrainian lives.
We know as well that Ursula von der Leyen was the defence minister who completely destroyed the German military when she was the minister under Angela Merkel. And it keeps popping up in the newspaper, and yet there she is in the EU, standing behind a lectern, talking the talk. Yeah. Why are we not calling that out?
I don't know. And she comes across as a holier than thou now, and you are responsible. She's not responsible for the war, of course she's not responsible, but you're responsible for a lot of the situation that Germany now finds itself in. I mean, Germany got rid of their own sort of fossil fuel power industry to go green, and that has led to them relying on Russia, which are now waging war almost on Germany's doorstep. Let's not forget, it's not that far away, is it? So, and they're responsible for it. But this holier-than-thou attitude that everyone seems to have, it's like, oh, don't worry about what we did in the past. We're here now and we're taking the moral high ground on it. It's very frustrating. We should be calling them out, and yet we're not. Very little is being said.
I want to know your views on this. Email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk. Of course, you can tweet us at gbnews. You're with GB News on TV and radio. After the break, Boris Johnson is in India. But what is he aiming to achieve trade-wise? And can it be done? First, let's get a check on the weather forecast.
Hello there. Welcome to a weather update from the Met Office. I'm Claire Nazir. Now, into the weekend, a few showers still lurking around. We are chasing cloud, but there will be some sunshine and also a brisk wind. Pretty much sets the scene for the next few days and into the early part of next week. And the reason why we're stuck in a pattern with low pressure across Iberia, high pressure extends across Iceland. And you can see here lots of isobars on that chart, bringing in that cool breeze from a cool North Sea. The winds will be gusty over the higher ground. But a pleasant evening for many on Friday evening. Some sunshine to end the day, still a gusty wind, and an overnight that cloud rolls in yet again from the North Sea, certainly for the eastern side of England, southeast Scotland, and the far north of Scotland, seeing that that low misty cloud. And one or two showers lurking around, but most places will have a dry night. Temperatures holding up as well because of that wind. So through Saturday morning, we watch as the cloud slowly breaks up towards the west. But where it's thick enough, particularly Pennine districts, Midlands, seeing a little bit of showery rain through the morning into the afternoon. The low clouds across the far north will burn back to the coast. Brighter skies, Northern Ireland, Western Scotland, the West Country seeing some fine conditions as well. But if you catch that wind, it's going to feel cold, particularly on this east coast. So here, temperatures typically around 14, 15 degrees Celsius. Further west, we'll see a 16 to 18 Celsius. Now, through Saturday evening and overnight, we watch as some showers towards the near continent migrate towards the southeast of England and then push further west. So you may see a little bit of wet weather as we enter Sunday. But Sunday will be fair for most. Some sunshine, still that nagging wind, more cloud on Monday, a few showers towards the south. But the key feature of the weather over the next few days will be it will turn cooler. Certainly you'll feel the difference through the beginning of next week. Bye-bye.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, but to the point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
After months of obfuscation and delay, it seems the snowball has started to roll down the hill for Boris Johnson, gathering momentum and looking as though a vote of no confidence come summer could mean curtains. Standing between Bojo and his job is a committee of 7 MPs who must agree on whether he willfully lied to Parliament. Boris 3 times told the Commons that guidance was followed at all times in number 10. The only way he can now get off the hook is if he can convince the committee that this is what he truly believed. If found guilty, he faces suspension and a potential parliamentary recall. A Prime Minister fighting a by-election to save his own skin would be so absurd he'd surely be toppled beforehand. If only the keen classicist had taken on board the wisdom of Sophocles, that a lie never lives to old age. Joining me now on the show is barrister Stephen Barrett. Now, Stephen, I understand that you think that actually Boris Johnson hasn't necessarily lied to Parliament. Explain that.
I certainly don't think that anybody will establish that the Prime Minister has lied. And I don't think that my position is in any way controversial. A number of lawyers have made this comment. And I think what we're bumping into is how we use language in our society, because it's become quite normalized to throw words like lie, and here we probably mean deliberately or willfully mislead, but let's just stick with lie because it helps the public. It's been common to throw these terms around, but something like a lie, which is important, it's a very important thing, it operates like law, and it has a legal test to it. So somebody doesn't lie just because they say something you don't like. Somebody doesn't lie just because they genuinely believe something, but it later turns out to be false. And that's particularly important with law. So this idea, to my mind, this idea of calling people who disagree on law liars sort of started around the Miller 2 case. Do you remember the Brexit case with Miller 2 about the prorogation of Parliament? Mm. So we got a result from the Supreme Court, and it was all of them. They were unanimous, and they said that the prorogation was unlawful, and accordingly it had to be reversed. Before that happened, the Lord Chief Justice of England and Wales had come to the opposite conclusion. So if you had the opposite conclusion to the Supreme Court, you were standing with the Lord Chief Justice of England and Wales. That's not lying. That's not willfully or deliberately misleading anybody. And on these events and what is happening now inside Parliament, I presume, and it is actually only a presumption, because actually Parliament has the freedom to set up any sort of inquiry it wants to. It's not clear that Parliament's inquiry even has to correspond with what we call Article 6, the right to a fair trial. If Parliament wants to, it can find all sorts of things which a court would never find. If Parliament wants to, it can act in all sorts of ways that a court would never act. But if we start from the assumption that Parliament will act as the courts act, there's just an immediate hurdle. You know, the Prime Minister said that he'd been assured that all rules were followed. Right, well, here I am. I wrote in The Spectator in December saying that there was a legal defence to the number 10 things and the civil servant claims. It's very important to distinguish the two. And I genuinely believe that. That's my legal opinion, and I haven't shifted on it. No court has given a judgment to make me shift on it. And if the Prime Minister says, well, I used to edit The Spectator, so I read it, come a cold, wet Sunday. I don't know if Prime Ministers get cold, wet Sundays, but you see where this is going. If he says, well, I read Mr. Barrett, and so I believed, what I was doing was lawful, well, then how on earth is anybody going to show that he was lying, that he was actively misleading? In order to actively mislead the House, he would have had to secretly be a genius lawyer who disagrees with me. That's fine. That's okay. Good lawyers can disagree with me. That's not bad. But he would have to be a secret lawyer, genius lawyer, who secretly disagreed with me, disagreed with his own interest, told the Times newspaper about the cake, the birthday cake, in some sort of act of severe self-harm for no obvious sort of logical reason. And I just don't see how this burden can ever be reached. Now, the contrast I made, and when I put this in the article, is because the lawyers and law are kept out of parliamentary affairs. We are gate-kept and taken out of it. Because of Blair reforms, we're not even there anymore. We're not even in the building anymore. We've been thrown out the building. So Parliament can do whatever it wants to. When we teach young people constitutional law, the sort of classic line is to tell them that if Parliament wants to, it can outlaw smoking on the streets of Paris. Now, everybody presumes that the Parisians would, certainly when I was taught it, perhaps not today, would gleefully carry on smoking, even though Parliament had said it was now against the law. But Parliament would have the power to purport to make that law. I think in my article I used the example of something even more extreme.
So in brief, Steve, essentially what we're saying is that Parliament indeed has its own power to conduct its inquiry as it wishes, but in the eyes of the law, you would have to prove that this was done willfully, and there's evidence to the contrary. Steve Barrett, it's been fascinating having your legal position on this. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Meanwhile, Boris Johnson is in India meeting Prime Minister Narendra Modi to discuss supplying the nation with weaponry and working towards a free trade deal. But the visit is not without controversy. The Indian leader has refused to openly condemn Russia's invasion of Ukraine, signing an energy deal with Moscow, from whom they have long bought weapons. Well, joining me now is Aman Singh Bogal, founding chairman of the Global Britain Centre. Hi, welcome to the show, Aman. I know that you are very keen to see a closer bilateral relationship between India and the UK. Do you welcome Boris Johnson's visit there with open arms?
Yes, absolutely. I think it's in the 75th year of Indian independence. I think today is a good day for Global Britain and for New India. There you go. It's a good day because, look, our nations are two global powers, and we've seen today on the global stage two global statesmen driving forward this very special relationship underpinned by the living bridge that is the 1.8 million British Indian diaspora, our close links, whether it be getting the vaccines out there over the last 2 years, designed in the UK, made in India, that was Covishield, the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine. We are partnering a lot of things. And I think today's day shows what scope and what potential there exists.
And what's your reaction to the way that Narendra Modi has sort of been very reticent in criticising Putin? I mean, do you look at this as, well, India has to get fuel from somewhere? It's a huge growing economy with millions, billions, in fact, of mouths to feed. And frankly, perhaps we have been cutting India off a little bit too much, meaning that they have had to turn throughout history to countries such as Russia for both weapons and energy.
Well, historically, things have been quite different. But I think today we've seen the Prime Minister sign a 10-year defence agreement with India. And a big part of that is about partnering with India to not just hand over weaponry and technology, but to make in India, which is a flagship program of Prime Minister Modi. And of course, the whole matter of technological transfer. And I think what Prime Minister Boris Johnson is trying to do is underpin that bridge by bringing the things that matter much more closer, and that is the defense in the Indo-Pacific. Look, India is the frontier of freedom when it comes to the Indo-Pacific, facing the Chinese Communist Party on its borders, facing various other threats around its neighborhood. And I think today's development of this defense agreement is a very welcome news indeed.
Man, you were very welcome on this programme. Aman Singh Bagal there talking about the Prime Minister's visit to India, the prospects potentially of a free trade agreement by Diwali, which of course comes up around autumn time, October, November. You're with GB News on TV and DAB Radio. After the break, we're crossing to our reporter in France to get the latest on the French elections and asking if Le Pen is still in the battle. But first, it's time for a check on the news headlines.
Thank you, Alex. Good afternoon. It's 2:33. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. Boris Johnson says he's sure he'll still be Prime Minister later this year. That's despite criticism from senior members of his own party. Speaking this morning, Mr Johnson said the public want the government to get on and focus on other issues. That, as Conservative MP Tobias Ellwood said, there's an absence of discipline, focus and leadership in Downing Street. Last night, MPs ordered an investigation into whether the Prime Minister misled Parliament over COVID breaches. Boris Johnson says a new partnership agreed with India will enable the country to strengthen its own defence industry. The Prime Minister is currently in New Delhi for talks with his Indian counterpart, Narendra Modi. As part of the New Deal, Mr Johnson's pledged to support India's goal of building its own fighter jets. He said the two leaders had told negotiators working on a post-Brexit trade deal to get it done by Diwali in October. The United Nations is warning the number of civilians killed in Ukraine is going to be much higher as the horrors inflicted in areas of intense fighting come to light. The organisation added there's growing evidence of war crimes and said Russian troops have indiscriminately bombed populated areas, killing civilians and wrecking hospitals. This as Boris Johnson announced the British embassy in Ukraine's capital, Kyiv, will reopen next week. A German national linked to the disappearance of Madeleine McCann has been identified as a formal suspect by Portuguese authorities. In 2020, German police said they're investigating a man known as Christian Bruckner in connection with the disappearance of the 3-year-old in Praia de Luz in May 2007. TV online and DAB Plus radio, this is GB News. It's back to Alex, and we need to talk about in just a moment. Don't go anywhere.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you, or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
why is Le Pen doing better this time round in the French presidential elections than last time? Who are her supporters? What are her policies? Does she really want to leave the EU? And is she really far right? Well, tune into any other broadcaster and it'd be a miracle if any of those basic questions are answered, let alone accurately. But on my show, we don't care for the lazy tropes of the legacy broadcasters and are determined to get to the bottom of how this socialist firebrand with a distinct bent of populist policy is so appealing, especially to the French youth, and what this means for Brexit Britain. Well, let's cross live to Paris. And GB News reporter Paul Hawkins. Paul, Marine Le Pen is getting the backing of young people over there. From the people you've been speaking to, what sort of views are you hearing? Do you think that there are lots of people out there prepared to support her?
Well, there is a significant number of people, Alex, who are prepared to support her. Not here in Paris. In Paris, 35% voted for Macron, about 30% voted for Jean-Luc Mélenchon. He's the far-left candidate, and only 5% was polled by Le Pen in the capital. So in the capital, there isn't much support for Le Pen. Her support tends to be in places like Pas-de-Calais in the north. That's where her base is. That's where she shores up her support, especially amongst the sort of industrial heartlands there, the former mining areas, that kind of place where people there feel left behind. Those are the kind of people who support Le Pen. In places like Paris and in other parts of France, particularly the urban areas, there tends to be more support for Macron. But although he leads in the polls by 10 points, it's far from certain that he'll be victorious on Sunday, given that, as we've seen in the past with Brexit and Trump, the polls can get it wrong, and there is a significant body of support for Jean-Luc Mélenchon, the far-left candidate who came third in the first round. He polled 22%. The big question is where those votes are going to go. A lot of young people voted for him, and a lot of people are asking, well, if they abstain, if they decide not to vote for Macron simply because they don't like Le Pen, then that could hand Le Pen victory. So those people who are worried about a Le Pen presidency are voting for Macron, even though they're not really big fans of him either.
And in terms, there are lots of parallels, as you said, being drawn between the Brexit referendum campaign and perhaps the news coverage on plenty of other channels of Le Pen, pushing potentially that vote underground. But what might a Le Pen presidency mean for Brexit Britain and Anglo-French relations?
Well, you'd have to say, Marine Le Pen, she used to campaign for Frexit, for France leaving the European Union. Now, at the last presidential election, she dialed that down and said that she simply wants to leave the euro. Now she's not talking about either of those things. She's talking about securing French borders, but remaining a member of the EU, and within the EU trying to reform it, trying to change it. She believes that French law should have primacy over EU law. She wants to tighten borders. She wants to introduce a policy where French nationals get priority when it comes to housing and jobs. So that would put her, those kind of policies would directly contradict EU law. So although she's not calling for Frexit, the policies she wants to introduce would put her in conflict with would put France in conflict with the European Union. Now, if she were to secure French borders, say many years down the line, say France was to hold a referendum on leaving the European Union and it was to secure its borders, then it wouldn't be so easy for migrants to get across France to get to the UK. So potentially you could see less people crossing into the UK, certainly across the Channel on migrant boats, but it would certainly have an impact, her relationship with the EU, on the numbers of people coming to Britain.
Paul, thank you so much. Superb reporting there. It's been fantastic to catch up with you. We can speak now to French journalist Anne-Elisabeth Moutet, who... what is your take on the election and how this is likely to play out? Do you see resonances here of a vote being pushed underground because a whole section of the French electorate are being demonised, or do you think everything's just being played up for headlines?
I think it's been played up on the headlines, but on the other hand, I also think that your correspondent was very rightly saying that in Paris, Marine Le Pen doesn't have so many supporters, and most of the legacy media are headquartered in Paris. All of the television channels are headquartered in Paris. And the result is, for instance, if you take the debate that took part the day before yesterday, this morning, yesterday and this morning, the entire press, written media, broadcast media were all saying how she'd been terrible and she'd completely lost it. And she was wasn't able to improve, and people did columns about this, and all of this said exactly the same thing. And I don't think that it reflects really what people who are likely to vote for her to influence them. There are two reasons for that. We've seen, and that's similar to Britain in many ways, a sort of disappearance of the supremacy of legacy media. And we've also seen a complete lack of understanding of what people expect. It is perfectly true that Macron very often knew his facts better, in more minute detail. She had a platform. She wheeled it out. She was she was very simple. She spoke not like a teacher, or not like a sort of abstruse economist. She spoke like people actually do speak in real life. So when she was talking about matters on which she seems to be strong and that matters most to her voters, there was a feeling among them that she had won. Now, does that spill over to those necessary voters, mostly of them coming from the left, who might switch over from their vote in the first round? That's the real question of Sunday, because you will have a large proportion of Jean-Luc Mélenchon, the hard left, the French Corbyn, if you would, vote. They will switch to, many of them will abstain. Some of them will vote for Emmanuel Macron, but there's possibly a quarter of them who would vote for Marine Le Pen, in which case all bets are on.
I mean, she has put in place some pretty headline-grabbing policies, particularly targeting young people under 30s and coming up with what are extremely socialist proposals, one might argue.
Both Marine Le Pen and Jean-Luc Mélenchon are running what a very left-wing campaign in terms of public spending, in terms of the tax rebates for poorer people. She says, and he say, that most voters before 30 should not be taxed at all, which is very blanket because you've got people who do well. But what they're calling out to people who feel completely forgotten and who do not like to be held in contempt by the Parisian elite. And that's exactly what Emmanuel Macron did for 2 hours and a half. He would be looking at her like this. He said things like, oh my God, you really do not understand. He was dismissive. And either you want your president competent, and that's a large swathe of the electorate, or you would like your president to understand what is happening to you. And then you have, of course, her big weakness, which is, apart from Europe, which was mentioned by your correspondent, there's also the fact that she accepted loans from Vladimir Putin because French banks, virtue signaling French banks, would not give her loans, even though she was not a financial risk, since it was certain that she would pull more than 5%, and her campaign, therefore, would be able to reimburse those loans. And so she said, look, we are a poor party. This is not dishonorable. And that was a hit, actually, for lots of people. She mentioned things that Emmanuel Macron doesn't. For instance, trying to get a loan. She said, when he said that he would sort of give extra bonuses to categories of workers who don't do very well, she said, when you have bonuses, if you want to buy something, if you want a loan, if you want to try and buy your house, it's not taken into account. It's very obvious that this is not a problem that he has come across. So she's got a relatability that he doesn't have.
Elizabeth, it's been fascinating talking to you. Thank you for giving us a very candid and fresh take on the presidential elections in France. Now, Dawn, I want to ask you about this because, listening to the BBC's coverage, you'd think Mussolini was running for president, wouldn't you?
Well, exactly. It's this far right. You're instantly thinking, oh, my God, it's Hitler. It's very interesting what Paul was saying, I felt there, our correspondent out there. And he was saying that it's the industrial heartlands in the north who are the ones at the sharp edge of what's going on in France, certainly with the immigration problem as well. They're the ones who are more drawn to Marine Le Pen. And Paris is very similar to London. It's left-wing liberal lovies who are sort of like not really going to be that bothered by what's really going on for the poorer people of France. And it's like, oh my God, the virtue signalling, as the correspondent just pointed out, the virtue signalling banks wouldn't give her a loan. It's, that's not a financial decision, that's virtue signalling. And it's this far-right label. I mean, she's talking to the voters. She's addressing the people about the issues. And Macron took his eye off that ball. He forgot about domestic policy, a bit like Churchill did in the Second World War in this country. And Marine Le Pen has seized that and is running with it. And that is why she is doing well. I mean, whether she'll win or not, I doubt, but it's wrong. This far-right label instantly pigeonholes her as something that I suspect she actually isn't.
Yeah, well, traditionally her uncle's party were, of course, extremely socialists.
Well, this is the thing.
There you have it. Well, what is your take on this? GBviews at gbnews.uk, or you can tweet us at GBnews. Oh, nothing upsets the woke Twitterati more than when Elon Musk bought a chunk of Twitter itself. No sooner had his stake been purchased and the South African space weirdo had talked about ensuring free speech, did it emerge that he wouldn't be on Twitter's board after all. Take that, Elon, the gatekeepers of .com morality seemed to yell. But Elon, being Elon, who is hell-bent on triumphing over the laws of gravity, nature, space and time, had no worries in beating a rabble of rich, righteous shareholders. After all, he also happens to be the richest man on Earth and in space. And so he's re-emerged with a package to buy the lot of it. Well, joining me now on the show is technology journalist and author of Social Warming, The Dangerous and Polarising Effects of Social Media, Charles Arthur. Charles, do you think Elon is going to be successful in this refreshed bid to just buy the whole thing?
It's very difficult to say. The stock filing that he filed yesterday suggests that he hasn't actually got any of the shareholders on board with him. They don't seem to yet be going along with his idea. It's an enormous leveraged buyout. So there's a chunk of cash, but he's pledged 62.5 billion shares in Tesla for about $15 billion of cash. So it's about a 4-to-1 leveraging there of shares. There's some other money for bridge loans. There's other money that's being pledged in other ways. So it would put a terrific debt load onto Twitter. And some people who've run the calculations reckon that would mean paying back about $1 billion a year just in order to service the debt. Twitter has never made $1 billion a year. So either he would have to juice it up incredibly in terms of the profit that he made, or it would be an eternal hole down which he'd be pouring money.
Now, one thing that he has been relatively outspoken about is if he is to be able to use money, let's say, to have more control over Twitter, that he wants to enshrine free speech. Is it as simple as that? When it comes down to the way that algorithms work and the polarising nature of Twitter, would a new man at the helm like Elon Musk actually be able to turn it into something that perhaps those who have been silenced by what we consider to be the sort of .com bros in Silicon Valley, I mean, would it potentially be able to change the direction of the platform?
One of the former Twitter executives tweeted this the other day. Yeah, we tried the free speech thing. Elon, didn't work. If you go back to 2014 or so, I mean, basically the period between about 2014 to 2017, 18 or so, Twitter described itself publicly as basically the free speech wing of the free speech party. It was very much anything goes. You know, people are having pylons, that's fine, just let them go and do it. You know, people are completely misrepresenting what's going on, that's fine, just let them go and do it. The atmosphere was so toxic, and the fact that ISIS was able to use it, for example, as a way to promulgate its videos, and that Twitter had to go around putting out fires, in effect, all the time, meant that the load on the company, on its content moderation, was so huge that effectively it was going backwards all the time. Free speech just doesn't work in that sense. It's not actually the incredibly valuable thing that you think. And many countries actually repudiate it. Narendra Modi in India, you know, for all the plaudits that he's getting at the moment, has been one of the people, and his party has certainly been trying to, in effect, shut Twitter down in India, make it block certain tweets that are critical of his party. And so in that sense, they're no friends to free speech. And for all that Elon might think it's a great idea to have free speech all the time, A, it doesn't work in terms of the toxic atmosphere it creates on the network, and B, you have countries which will basically block the service if you are too maximal free speech about it.
Charles Arthur, thank you ever so much. Fascinating talking to you about this. Well, it's that time of the show when I get to unburden myself about stories getting my goat. If you struggle as much as me with the idiosyncrasies of the modern world, sit back and relax and know that you're in good company. The Co-op is scrapping sell-by dates, saying it's time customers use the sniff test to figure out whether to throw away food in the hope it will cut down on waste. Are there really people living their lives according to pixelated little date stamps on plastic lids? Strikes me that if there are, something is deeply wrong with a society that doesn't know how to feed itself. If you buy meat, cook it within days, and if it smells like funky feet, throw it away. If your cheese looks more like a tiny replica of the Amazon, it's probably not palatable. When your milk blobs out like cottage cheese into your freshly brewed cuppa, it's curdled. And if fish smells like, OK, let's not go there, don't put it in your face. If kids were still taught how to cook and bought stuff on the basis of need with a little consideration of home economics, we'd be richer, healthier, and annoyingly woke food companies that increasingly enjoy virtue signalling online would find themselves less able to peddle their wares. Now, it turns out women are having to use social media and meet up in dark corners of supermarket car parks to peddle in drugs like steroid-addled beefcakes. Why? Because despite menstruation and menopause being as old as humanity, for some reason in the 21st century, women's health is still regarded as the stuff of madness or too gross to talk about. With over 50% of the population doomed to hot sweats, hormonal rages, and a host of other unpleasantries, as one of the few menopausal mammals, it's a sad indictment of the still sexist nature of our society that women are having to take matters into their own hands. But also, it turns out the reason the incredibly few mammals that do get menopause, like elephants and orcas, well, they're all matriarchal societies where the risk of getting pregnant is wiped out by nature, so women can get on with the business of running society. Just saying. Turns out Plymouth University has festooned its bogs with intimidating warnings to not question whether a member of the opposite sex is using the loo, lest you upset Dirty Dave who wants to take a dump in cleaner surroundings or Pervy Pete who fancies peeking under toilet doors. This has to stop. For lots of women, the toilet is one of the only places we feel safe. It's where we do our slap, hide from creepy men, cry, swap sannies and sort out our tights when they do that weird crotch thing. To terrorise women who feel unsafe in toilets as incidents of rapes on campus surge is not just woke nonsense. It's enabling potential sexual assault and psychological abuse. Dawn, lots to get our teeth into.
Right, OK, well, first of all, smelling food to see if it's off, OK? In principle, I agree with you. I mean, we have lost the plot and we nanny state telling us how to do everything. However, as someone that lost her sense of smell from COVID a year ago nearly now, it's a bit dangerous for me. I mean, I can see if it's lumpy and stuff, but I can't smell things anymore, Alex, so that's a bit dangerous. But we do, rather than teaching kids how to be the new Greta Thunberg, which is the latest GCSE, isn't it, basically? Teach them how to cook, give them life skills again, you know, teach them how to cook properly, deal with finances, the sensible stuff that they will need, not how to be the new Greta. And don't get me started on the menopause.
I won't. And actually, I won't because we've actually run out of time. But, you know, it's been fantastic having you again today, Dawn. We'll have you back again to rustle up some more controversial news items. That's all I have time for. Join me again for We Need to Talk About next week on GB News. You know by now, same time, same place, 2 o'clock. Coming up next, it's The Briefing with the wonderful Arlene Foster. But first of all, let's have a little look at the weather forecast.
Hello there, welcome to a weather update from the Met Office. I'm Claire Nazir. Now, into the weekend, a few showers still lurking around. We are chasing cloud, but there will be some sunshine and also a brisk wind. Pretty much sets the scene for the next few days and into the early part of next week. And the reason why we're stuck in a pattern with low pressure across Iberia, high pressure extends across Iceland. And you can see here lots of isobars on that chart, bringing in that cool breeze from a cool North Sea. The winds will be gusty over the higher ground. But a pleasant evening for many on Friday evening. Some sunshine to end the day, still a gusty wind, and an overnight that cloud rolls in yet again from the North Sea, certainly for the eastern side of England, southeast Scotland, and the far north of Scotland, seeing that low and misty cloud. And 1 or 2 showers lurking around, but most places will have a dry night. Temperatures holding up as well because of that wind. So through Saturday morning, we watch as the cloud slowly breaks up towards the west. But where it's thick enough, particularly Pennine districts, Midlands, seeing a little bit of showery rain through the morning into the afternoon. The low clouds across the far north will burn back to the coast. Brighter skies, Northern Ireland, Western Scotland, the West Country seeing some fine conditions as well. But if you catch that wind, it's going to feel cold, particularly on this east coast. So here, temperatures typically around 14, 15 degrees Celsius. Further west, we'll see a 16 to 18 Celsius. Now, through Saturday evening and overnight, we watch as some showers towards the near continent migrate towards the southeast of England and then push further west. So you may see a little bit of wet weather as we enter Sunday. But Sunday will be fair for most. Some sunshine, still that nagging wind, more cloud on Monday, a few showers towards the south. But the key feature of the weather over the next few days will be it will turn cooler. Certainly you'll feel the difference through the beginning of next week. Bye-bye.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that